left unsaid. Days that can't be counted by the time till rent. Tomorrow's just another like the one that comes next. The corner of the highway that leads to the job, at the desk by the boss with the elegant watch. The tick of the clock and the tick of the clock mark the moments till the ticking stops.
We have a returning guest to the podcast today, Anne Libera, who is the director of comedy studies for the Second City and Columbia College Chicago, where she created the Comedy Writing and Performance BA. She created and teaches a class called the Agile Pitch at Northwestern's Farley Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and served as executive artistic director of the Second City Training Centers and Education Programs from 2001 until 2009. She has worked with the Second City since 1986 and has taught in its training center since 1991, where her students have included Ashley Nicole Black, Amy Poehler, Christian Schall, Jordan Peele, and Stephen Yun, to name a few. She has a new book published by Northwestern University Press. It's called Funnier, A New Theory for the Practice of Comedy. If you are new to the podcast, she's also my wife. You're going to enjoy the pod. And Libera, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kelly Leonard.
So we're going to conduct this like a normal podcast interview, but we'll also bring in our stuff. There's a line in your new book, Funnier, that I think is core to your entire approach to the work in the comedy field. This is when I talk about that, I'm like, about your comedy major, it's about the book, all that stuff. You say, quote, "The real secret to creating good comedy is to start by creating comedy that is likely not good at all," end quote.
Well, I mean, this is also the core value that I got from Second City, which is starting with improvisation and starting with taking a risk and starting with trying something. So at its heart, that value is that improvisational value of just do it, just try something. But beyond that, the other thing that I have learned both as a comedy teacher and as a comedy director, and through the work I've done here at the Second City, is that comedy is iterative. It is about making something and then trying it out in front of an audience. It is what makes good comedy is really an intersection of what you make as a comedian and an audience that finds it funny. And the ways in which you adjust that comedy. The book is so much about what are the ways that you create this sort of bad thing that people might find funny. And then how do you, what are all the elements that you adjust to, as the title of the book says, make that comedy funnier? But even more so, and this is part of my definition of comedy, is that comedy is something that is created to generate laughter or humor in a given audience. So you don't know what your audience is going to think until you get the work up in front of them. Eventually, over time, you will figure it out a little bit and you'll have a pretty good sense of that. So, if you're working in television, you're going to have a pretty good sense of what's going to happen. But even on Saturday Night Live, they do a test rehearsal in front of the audience before they start filming.
So this is something, of course, I think most people would understand how this is true for people starting out. Oh yeah, you start, you do that. But the making of bad comedy continues throughout your entire career, right?
Right. Well, there are comedians, stand-ups go and work in front of audiences and purposely bomb over and over and over again in order to make sure that the work that they are making is the work that they really want to do. So you're always testing out what is working now, because what is funny this year is not going to be what is funny next year. What is funny about you this year isn't necessarily what's going to be funny about you next year, because of all the ways in which the things, and I'm going to go into the sort of the three primary elements of comedy that I have sort of identified as being what we manipulate when we create comedy, right? And the first one of those is recognition. What are the things we recognize right now? Some of that could be what we find true right now. but mostly it's, what do we recognize? What's in our world? What shows up? You can get, as you know, you can get a laugh purely on recognition from an audience, right? You say something that everybody understands or knows, you will get that laugh. The version that I talk about a lot in the book is when we were on the cruise ships. And in particular, we were on the cruise ship that was in Europe, which was not primarily English speakers, which I think you wouldn't necessarily know. They were primarily German and Spanish speakers for whom English was their second language. And so what we found, that in order to help them find something that was really funny, we had to give them things they knew from the cruise ship. We had to share the things about the small bathrooms and the way the toilets sound like it's a cyclone happening. Those are the things that are recognizable to them. The second album, though, is pain. And one of the things about pain is that what is painful right now, and certainly there's a lot that's painful right now in the United States, particularly around things like immigration, is something that wasn't necessarily painful 20 years ago, right? And things that were painful 20 years ago, things that weren't painful 20 years ago feel differently now. So you're always adjusting to, and maybe even a great example, and you were part of this, was when 9/11 happened, and we were supposed to open a show on
9/13. It was actually 9/13.
Actually the 12th, wasn't it?
12. I think it was one of those. It was a day or two after.
And all of a sudden, just an odd mention of an airplane.
Couldn't do it.
You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Something that wasn't even painful at all.
No.
Was suddenly too painful to put into a comedy show, right? Because because of that third element, which, so in my comedy theory, we're using recognition, pain, and then some kind of distance. And that distance can be psychological, it can be physical, it can be temporal. So tragedy plus time equals comedy, but tragedy plus not time does not equal comedy. So those things are always changing depending on what is happening in the world, what is happening to that audience, what we know. Again, one of the interesting things to me with my students is the advent of TikTok, and this sort of algorithm means that there are certain things, like, how the kids, when I say the kids, I mean the under 15s now all say 6, 7.
Yeah, I just still don't know what that means.
I don't know that it means anything.
Okay.
But that's like something that is very funny to them, that you and I only know it as a reference because I know that it's funny to them. I don't have any response myself to it, right? So we're in these funny little pods. So finding what the thing is that everybody knows is actually much harder. And again, goes back to getting it up in front of people and figuring out what they all can respond to at the same time. And that doesn't change.
Yeah, and I think it's worth digging more into these sort of three elements of your comedy theory, because it is a new theory. This is there are many theories of comedy that you lay out in the book, and I think the one thing that none of them had was that recognition piece. And I think that's because the people who are providing these theories are not comedy makers. And so, and when you first devised this, you actually didn't use the word recognition, you used the word truth.
Right.
But then you could, true was not the issue.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be true. Well, and I think it doesn't have to be true for us to find it funny. It just has to be recognizable. And that is also where all sorts of the stuff about stereotype. So stereotype is something that feels true, but in actuality is not true. And I think there's some interesting research about the fact that if we laugh at something, we seem to feel that it is true.
Right.
And it has to do with if we laugh at something with another group of people. If other people are laughing at something, we tend to believe that they also recognize it and therefore it is true. But again, it doesn't have to be true for us to laugh at it. It simply has to feel true.
You know, what's interesting about that, because you and I have both been interviewed a lot over the last decade or so about
Mhm.
is Trump funny? And, you know, you can debate this, but one of the things that is true is he gets laughs,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the laughs that he gets are the ones that you were talking about. They're very much of a complicit kind of laugh that is usually at the expense of someone who is less privileged.
Correct. He is, and he works like a stand-up comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He tests lines out.
Mm-hmm.
He plays different things in front of different crowds. You know, I this is also an interesting thing, is the recognition that comedy is amoral.
Right.
You
Right.
can laugh at something that you have lots and lots of psychological distance on people who you see as lesser than you. I mean, and historically, let's be clear, the comedy of the last 5,000 years has mostly been at the expense of marginalized and or the lower classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the kings really enjoyed watching that jester who was someone that they got to beat up, and that was funny.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The realization that comedy itself is amoral, which it does not mean that it cannot be used for good. But just because an audience laughs doesn't mean it's a good laugh.
Right, because the King's Fool had another side to him, right?
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I want to make sure that we are not glorifying. I think
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of stand-ups who sort of get into this mode of like, well, we're the King's Fool and it's our job to speak truth to power. And it is. And the King's Fool, a king who did not have a fool, was seen to be a lesser king because he didn't have anyone. Again, this is divine right of kings. He did not have anyone who spoke truth to power. And so and we know that lots of authoritarian regimes outlaw comedy pretty quickly first because they don't want that truth spoken.
Right. Well, that was the tumult that we saw a few weeks ago with this comedy festival in Riyadh, where
Right.
a lot of our truth teller American comedians who even doing this were like, oh, we had freedom of speech. I'm like, you signed a contract that said you would not do jokes about the government there to get your big paycheck.
Right.
So whatever, dude.
Yeah, well, but also, again, comedy, we have to be careful of thinking of ourselves as comedians as being, I think there's an incredible amount of good that can happen from comedy
Mm-hmm.
and humor, and there's incredible value. But we are not automatically good just because someone laughs.
Sure.
Right. And that's, we sort of start to style our comedians as being somehow truth tellers. It's comedy is a business that's about money and popularity.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, there's very few state sponsored comedy troupes.
Thank God.
but realizing that I think it is complicated because, again, we want comedy to be moral and to have a moral quality because it is so socially powerful. And ultimately, and there's lots of good evidence about the power of laughter and the ways in which laughter creates connection. So all of this is I think a very intrinsic part of us being human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we're also comedy has a dark side that I think recognizing, and certainly as people who want to use comedy, being aware of, knowing that comedy is about pain and very fundamentally can be connective in terms of you and I sharing our pain, but can also push people apart by othering someone. Right. And so but I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I found that this theory really helped me and helped my students think about how to make better comedy, but also how to make their comedy better.
Yeah, and to understand the distance part of it, the distance can be physical,
Sure.
It can be temporal. I mean,
Right.
it's any form of distance that will make what you're doing be more effective. So you brought up the 9/11
Mhm.
show, which was titled "Embryos on Ice" or "Fetus Don't Fail Me Now," because that's what was on everyone's mind.
Uh,
Uh,
just before that.
right, but then maybe 6 months later, our second theater, the Second City
Mhm.
ETC, was able to do a show that was all about 9/11, called Holy War Batman, which ended up being a giant hit. It launched the career of Keegan Michael Key.
Yeah.
And it was, we could never have done that show 6 months earlier, because then time had passed and we knew how we could talk about this thing. And all credit to the Onion, because they were the first ones who
God.
came out and made jokes that worked. I think they had a format in which they could do that, which was maybe one that was easier to manipulate than what
Well,
we do.
yeah, I mean, on a very simple level, using the news. I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that the Onion has going for them is using the news, and using headlines immediately gives a bit of distance. It is not emotional. It is quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, factual.
Mm-hmm.
It is, so it automatically it gives a frame for how to read it, and as a result provides an automatic distance, and then they within that are insanely clever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really really tight. But I want to go back to Holy War Batman, because one of my favorite sketches in that is there's a point at which a character just says plane, and she goes, "Can we say plane yet?"
Yeah, that's right.
and this is true for that
Yeah.
cast.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because they were actually, their first day of rehearsals was supposed to be 9/11.
Yeah. They cleaned the
So
dressing room.
they, right,
That's what
they
they did
cleaned the
that
dressing
day.
room. But they were out on a stage in front of an audience saying, "Is this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, no, it's not okay. What
Yeah.
about this? How do you feel? What of this can you laugh at? What can't you?" And that's, in many ways, that was what made that show so special, was that they were really in dialogue with, how are we dealing with this right now?
And I mean, one of my favorite nights at Second City of all time, and you know this,
Mhm.
was when a bunch of rescue
9/11.
workers from Ground
Right.
Zero came to the show, and and look, we were taking serious shots at New York, that was part
Sure.
of the joke of it. These guys loved it, and the show got a standing ovation. And then when Keegan announced who those folks were,
They
the
got us.
audience gave them a standing ovation. I mean, it was just one of those, like, I
Yeah.
got chills. And the cast did not have to sacrifice the integrity of the comedy they were doing, in part because this testing period had showed them this is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And look, and let's be honest, the people who get offended at our shows are almost universally offended on behalf of someone else, not the people that would actually be
Yeah. Yeah.
the
That's that weird thing of, this is potentially offensive. I'm
right.
not offended, but
Mm-hmm.
somebody else might be. But
Yeah.
there's also that question of whether offense happens at the speaker's mouth or the listener's ear,
Right.
right? Because I think when people are offended, they believe that you should know that
Mm-hmm.
whatever thing you are making fun of is too sacred, or too important, or too painful to be made fun of. And I think one of the really interesting things about working with young people who want to be comedians is that younger people tend to have a lot more distance on some of the more painful parts of life, and so they're very happy to joke about mass murder or whatever,
Right.
right? Because they don't have that experience. And so, one of the things that I ended up doing in terms of creating the comedy major was really early on realizing, oh, I've got to do something about comedy ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I do believe that when you're a comedian, you're going to start out by doing terrible work, and some of that work is going to be terrible because you don't know that it's going to hurt somebody.
Yep.
But it was really important for me to spend some quality time with the first years just sort of saying, okay, let's think about what your comedy ethics are, right? What do you believe is too painful? What don't you have distance on? What are other people's comedy ethics? And then deciding how and when you're going to tell certain kinds of jokes. And you may decide your personal comedy ethics may be that anything is fair game, right? But I want you 18-year-olds
Right.
to at least think about it instead of accidentally realizing that you've hurt someone when you didn't intend to, which is also something that happens in comedy. You think everybody's got distance on what you have distance on.
It's interesting. I think you and I talked about this when we were on a plane this
Mhm.
this weekend, because I'm reading a book for an upcoming podcast with someone who's talking about he's a learning expert, and it's the future of education, and he is quite rightly taking shots at the industrial education complex that we've got, because it doesn't meet the future.
Mhm.
And what we see happening in education is, a need to move from, you get hours because you sat in a chair,
Right.
to you get credits for building up your skills. And as we're talking about this comedy making, it seems to me it is thoroughly applicable to where the world is going, the world of work is
Mhm.
going. And I'll give you one example, which is just simply understanding the separation of generation from analysis,
Right.
which is something that I want you to talk about with regard to your work, but honestly applies to anyone who is trying to make something out of nothing.
Right. I mean, when you are creating comedy, the very first thing you do is you just make a lot of a thing,
Yep.
and don't try to fix it while you're doing it.
Yep.
Lots and lots of times, if you start to analyze the thing while you are making the thing, you will stop making the thing, and the thing will get so, and by thing I mean maybe a joke, maybe a story, maybe a sketch, maybe a movie. But if you start to analyze it and judge it while you are in the process of creation, you're never going to get to the end. Right. And so the biggest thing, certainly with jokes, but really with all comedy, is this idea of getting that process out, doing the process, and then going back and saying, and it can be simple, does this make sense? Do I like this? but not even judging it in terms of, does this make sense and do I like this, while you're generating it, just getting it out, because 90% of this work, of all work, is making a thing.
That's right. And making a thing in groups often.
Yes, which is its own separate place, where learning how to collaborate means having certain kinds of clarity on what our goal is, but also maybe even more so what our strategy is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people, our goal is, we're going to do a great show. Okay, how are we going to get there? That's way more important.
As you know, one of my bugaboos is always like, well, you just got to produce a hit show. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you, thanks for telling me that. Yeah, I hadn't considered the fact that I want it to be well received.
Well, but I think that is a common misconception. I want to be popular. Well, you don't. What does popular mean? Popular with whom? Popular within what realm? I mean, one of the things that, I teach comedy history, and comedy is a popular medium. There are as we said earlier, there are very few state-sponsored comedy theaters, which means that it's always a little bit about commerce. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time with my students saying is, if you're thinking about making something, one of the things you want to think about is, what system are you making it within? What is this for? Sitcom, as an example, was a advertising model, sponsorship model. It existed to sell a product.
Soap. Yes. Or whatever.
Right. So the idea being that if you're making a sitcom, you want something that is comfortable and familiar and easily accessible to everybody, and uses something that most people understand, like character. Jokes don't travel well, but characters seem to be eternal.
Yeah,
Characters,
a family, a
yes,
spouse,
yeah,
business. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
In fact, some of the earliest comedies in ancient Greece are basically sitcoms. They're about
Hmm.
angry old dads whose sons want to break out and do something new.
Okay. Well,
Also, My Three Sons. Uh,
yes.
um,
That well-known
that
Greek.
well-known 1960s. I went way back. Okay. But a family sitcom, right?
Yeah.
Also, Home Improvement.
Hmm.
Also, Everybody Loves Raymond.
Hmm.
These are all these stories. Um, so as when you're thinking about comedy, you're also thinking about what am I making for this space, for this time, for these people. So you're taking all those things into account, not because I'm looking. I mean, yes, we all want success, but taking those things into account doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a hit. But taking those things into account mean that you're making choices. Again, what is my goal? Right? And then what is my strategy for getting there? Which is I'm going to make choices based on what I know about this audience, this time, this space, all of those elements. And then I'm going to do something kind of bad and try it out.
So, yeah, you and I have spent our lives in this field, and as you sort of took this academia turn,
Mhm.
one of the things we recognized is, yeah, there's a bunch of books out there about comedy theory that
Yeah.
are written by academics who have no practical comedic experience, and then there are comedians who talk about the way they do their comedy,
Yes.
but it's always through that lens, right?
Yeah.
So if they write jokes, it's going to be that all comedy or jokes. And one of the things that I love about this book is you're able to talk about the theories,
Mhm.
and you don't limit your lens because you work across different genres, but you are able to draw on things that happen in the classroom
Sure.
or the stage. And one of my favorites I want you to talk about, because I think it's a perfect illustration of taking your understanding of comedy and how to
Mhm.
manipulate it to have it work for
Mhm.
audiences. You had a student, John Reynolds,
Mhm.
who people might know from Stranger Things and many other. He's up and
Search
coming
Party
comedian.
is the other big
Search
thing that
Party.
he's done. So he's mostly an actor now.
Yeah, mostly an actor now, and was an edgy young man at Second City, who I believe when he left, quit Second City, he might have given me the finger on the way out the door.
No, you're thinking of a
Oh, is that a
different
different one?
young
Sorry,
edgy
John Reynolds. I apologize. Who gave me the finger on the way out the
Brad
door?
Einstein.
Oh, it was Brad Isaacson. Okay,
Einstein.
Brad Einstein. Okay,
Yes.
yeah. All right, Brad, that was you. So, but John was still a little angry. I'm not wrong on that.
No, I don't know that he was angry. He was just really interested in doing things that were very edgy.
Yeah.
The comedy he liked and the comedy that he wanted to do was not anything that Second City was interested in at that point.
Okay.
I don't know if we still are. If we
Yeah.
are now, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And genuinely interested in creating things that were so painful that they sort of go to the other side of pain, right?
Right.
Where you have distance because you're like, oh no. I mean, and there have traditionally been comedians. Andy Kaufman is maybe a good example of someone who's really interested in comedy of discomfort. Ernie Kovacs had aspects of that, right? So the story though is I was directing John in a student's show, and pretty much everything he pitched was so uncomfortable and so painful and like so boundary breaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was like he had so much distance and so much irony in his own brain that he was pitching things that you would never be able to put in front of an audience in a million years.
Mm-hmm.
They would be horrified.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, he would pitch it and then we'd watch it and it would just be uncomfortable and awkward. And how are we possibly improvising this terrible, terrible premise? But I understood what he was going for, and he has a really tremendous comedy brain. I could see the vision that he had, it just wasn't working within the context that we were in. So what I ended up doing was having him write a monologue that was him coming out on stage and saying, I'm furious with my director. She has cut I have pitched brilliant comedy material, and she has cut every single one of my sketches from the show. Mm-hmm. And then he went on to list a series of sketches, all of which were things that he had actually pitched.
Yeah.
And what happened is that with that amount of distance, and it was, so now I've given him, it's through his lens, it's through my lens. All the actual sketches happen off stage.
Yeah, the audience knows they're not going to see these things.
They're not going to be required to see any of it. But it's real. So there's this interesting level of recognition and distance. And it was very, very funny. It was actually, there were a couple people who thought that I'd actually was mad at him about it. And I'm like, why did I put it in the show that you got to do this? Which he found very funny, actually. The idea that people somehow took it seriously also made him laugh. But it was a great example of taking something that was very painful, providing distance, but also showcasing this very specific point of view in a way that the audience could understand what was funny about him, because he's genuinely really funny, just in this very niche, extreme way.
I was doing a podcast yesterday with Goldie Chan, who is an interesting woman. She's wrote a book about introverts and personal branding. And we got on.
That's me.
Yeah. It's by the way, totally you. You need to read this book. And we were talking about charisma and curiosity, and we started getting down this sort of rabbit hole. And I'd actually mentioned your work, and then I knew we were talking today, and I'd done my notes. So I was like, oh, wait, there's a quote. There's a few lines from your book that I don't remember you using in keynotes or anything that I love. And one of them is, quote, "The gap between what we assume we know and what we actually know is the space where surprise lives." Mm-hmm. And she loved that. I love that. I want you to break it down a bit, because I think it reflects not just the comedy knowledge you have, but this is where also the work that you and I have done with the behavioral science community also sort of shows us, like, the one thing that is so hilarious about working with the behavioral scientists is they have reaffirmed our choice of life's work. Yes. Because they basically would tell you, like, no one really knows what's going on. And you're like, oh, great. That was our assumption all along.
This is what we got.
Yes. Okay, great. We can keep doing this then.
Well, no. And I think, so this is actually exactly all those inherent biases that we have, right? Sunk cost fallacy, now I'm blanking on where if somebody actually uses a number, adjusting, right? You're going to hear something and you're going to use that number in a negotiation just because somebody randomly said a number, and you're just going to play with that number. So it's, our brains were designed to work quickly, but not necessarily very well.
Well, it's certainly not in the level of noise that we exist in the modern world.
But it's pretty. The whole brain thing is good enough.
Yeah.
Right? Anchoring and adjustment. That's the behavioral science phrase. So the line between what we think should be true and what really is true is, again, where comedy, a pun is actually an exact version of that.
Yeah.
Right. Phyllis Diller, light travels faster than sound, which is why some people seem bright until they speak. And it's just the difference in the word bright.
Yeah.
That is the key to that observation, as well as the fact that some people seem bright until they speak, which is also a recognition moment, right? But it's that simple. And the fact that we all make errors all the time, and little tiny errors, is a kind of pain that recognizing it, and this is a different kind of recognition, but recognizing that we all make those little errors also is valuable to us.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us know that what we see isn't really the way the world works. And there's some suggestion that this might be one of the sort of original ways in which comedy and humor was valuable to human beings as we evolved, is that it made recognizing our errors pleasurable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, through laughter.
There's another line which very much speaks to the criticisms that you hear when people do things like analyze comedy. You say, quote, "Every artist and artisan takes apart the thing they love to understand the inner workings." End quote.
Right. Well, there's the whole frog thing. We could just talk about the frog of it all.
Yep.
Because almost the original quote is from an anthology of humor by E.B. White and his wife, Catherine White.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we had a reading at our wedding.
Yeah.
That was Catherine White writing to her husband.
Yep. I recall.
It's ironic that this is where I've gone.
That stayed the course. I don't know if it's ironic. Fate.
But that analyzing comedy is like dissecting a frog. It's not very much use. It's not very useful, and the frog dies of it.
Yeah.
But of course that's not true. And everybody, and I think there's a lot of comedians who pretend that it's magic and that they are, magicians who do this amazing thing and there's no work behind the scenes, when actually comedy is the opposite of that. And I want to say, it's not important to analyze the jokes that you like if they just make you laugh. You don't have to know why. If you're going to make comedy, you have to. If you are a maker of a thing, I don't need to know what's inside my iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that it works. But if I'm going to make comedy, I have to know how it works and why it works and why it has worked in the past and what, so that I can start to predict what's going to work in the future.
Right, because if you want to make another kind of smartphone, you would then need to be able to break apart.
If I was interested in making smartphones, I would be taking a smartphones.
Yeah,
maybe.
which every inventor has done. This is every montage we've seen in a film about an inventor. They always taking things apart and put them back together. All right, this one. So this is very much about. So the No Kings rally was last weekend. In response, Trump had a meme of him in an airplane with a crown, pooping all over all those folks.
Protesters,
yeah. So you have a quote in the book, quote, "True irony is deeper than simple opposition. It is opposition mixed with justice of a sort," end quote. And I think that leads us to this difference between parody, satire. How does irony fit in there? Because Mike Johnson said that was satiric in his response, which I was that's not satire.
No, it's not. Well, and I mean, it's irony. I think is an actually fairly difficult concept to understand. I mean, sarcasm is like irony, right? But it's mostly just in tone. I'm going to say something while meaning the opposite. Irony is a tool of satire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you are pointing something out in the world that is true and needs to be changed, and that's what satire is. Satire is pointing out something that is wrong. I'm not sure what raining poop down on people is in any way satirical. It is ironic that Trump sees himself as at war with the protesters and as literally taking them down with excrement.
I mean, it feels very let them eat cake. And I'll
in a whole different way, right?
In a whole different way.
In all different ways. No, it is irony, but 100% not satire because there is nothing in what Trump was doing that was pointing out something that needed to be changed. It was purely, in the language of comedians, punching down.
Yeah. And it wasn't parody because it was a meme that wasn't related to at least anything I know.
No, and parody and parody is making fun on just a practical level. Parody is making fun of the form of the thing. So if he was parodying a protest march, that would be one thing.
Right.
But I don't know. There was no parody there. It was just sort of a mishmash of images that we recognize, but mostly just the kind of comedy that people that sometimes you end up with in insult battles.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, those insult battles, when they're good, a roast, for example.
Right.
First of all, one of the primary pieces of a roast is that everyone participating, including the roastee, has agreed to participate.
Right.
Right? Like that's a key. That's what makes a roast funny. And
well,
not
and the person being roasted has very high status. That's why they're being roasted.
Yes, absolutely. But otherwise it is truly punching down.
One of my recent podcasts with Toby Stewart was a lot about status. And some dude on LinkedIn was like another podcast about status. I'd rather there's something about his colon. It wasn't. It was. I deleted it from my feed, but it was interesting. And what is are there untoward amounts of status related content out there that I'm not aware of?
Apparently he's living in a very tiny world.
His bubble.
Right. He's got a bubble in which everybody's talking about status. I will say, I think, and I'm really interested in status from the improv perspective, which is a kind of set of behaviors that people use to show whether they are powerful or whether they are giving someone else power. And a lot of the current stuff that I know that you've been reading is more about social status in terms of what people sort of accrue from their careers.
That's right.
But actually, this is, as you know, this is my sort of side gig.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I use in my Northwestern class. I'm really interested in how people can use the insights from the way status is used in improvisation and in comedy to really change the way they behave to affect. It's not going to completely change their status in the other meaning, but it does affect it a little bit. You can change the way you stand. You can change the way you move. You can change the way you talk, and all of those things will change the way that people respond to you. And also, you can use it in comedy. It's always the high status person who gets the pie in the face.
Yeah, and think of any great comedy duo in American comedy history. Yeah, or English.
Or exactly, indeed. Almost always.
Okay, we're going to need to wrap up.
Yes.
And
I have rehearsal.
You have rehearsal, and I'm meeting with some Lithuanian improvisers.
This is the life we've chosen.
This is the life we've chosen. One last quote from the book, which I think is important. You say, quote, "I used to advise my students to value failure, but that's silly. No one really values failure. Failure sucks. What we need to value is the thing that put us into the position to fail in the first place, taking a risk."
Yeah. And I think that's just not just true in comedy, although comedy requires risk. You're not going to get to that laugh because it's that pain, right? If you're not willing to touch on something that's a little bit painful, you're not going to get to that real place of recognition, because the places where we really laugh hard are the places where real pain from our real lives comes together with real things, recognizable things, and then we're given it in a space that makes it safe for us to see that it is shared, that it is that we're not alone in it, right? And that it's maybe not as world-ending as it might be. And that's the key to it.
The book is called Funnier, A New Theory for the Practice of Comedy. And Libera, thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you.